Hello. My name is Inara Greaves. Yes, that Greaves. And if you're watching this, just know, 5 minutes after I was handed a key to the wrong bedroom, someone else screamed from the one meant for me. The rain had turned the sky the color of pewter, and Charleston smelled like wet magnolia and loss. I stood on the steps of the funeral home, watching droplets run down the glass where a slideshow played. Faces I knew by heart. My cousins, my brother, the grandchildren who had the right last name, flashed across the screen in soft dissolves. Weddings, graduations, Christmas mornings. But not one picture of me. Not one. The rain had turned the sky the color of pewter, and Charleston smelled like wet magnolia and loss. I stood on the steps of the funeral home, watching droplets run down the glass where a slideshow played. Faces I knew by heart. My cousins, my brother, the grandchildren who had the right last name, flashed across the screen in soft dissolves. Weddings, graduations, Christmas mornings. But not one picture of me. Not one. It wasn't that I'd been forgotten. It was that I'd been edited out. The doors opened and a hush rippled through the foyer. People nodded politely, whispering about the humidity, about the flowers. No one said my name. The scent of roses hit me first. Too sweet, too rehearsed. I slipped inside, water dripping from my coat onto the marble floor. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. No one offered a towel. Mother, Valora, stood near the casket in a black silk dress, posture sharp as a blade. She turned as if sensing a draft, not a daughter. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. Then she reached into her clutch and handed me a folded piece of paper. Tonight, 10 o'clock, the Greaves estate. Come alone. No hello. No condolence. Just an instruction. She didn't even whisper it. She knew I'd obey. I always had. I slipped the note into my pocket. The paper was dry, expensive, as if grief could be embossed. Around me, people murmured kind things they didn't mean. He was such a pillar. We'll all miss his wisdom. The lawyer, Silas Rowe, stood off to the side with the same expression he wore when he used to tutor me in trust law, patient, guarded. When our eyes met, he gave the smallest shake of his head, barely visible. Not pity, a warning. The service began. The minister spoke about legacy, about family values. Each word felt like a lie someone had dusted off for company. I stared at the closed casket and thought of the last time I'd seen my grandfather alive. He'd said, "Don't let them rewrite you, Inara. They're good at that." I hadn't understood. I did now. When it was over, the room filled with polite conversation and coffee cups clinking on saucers. I drifted to the back wall, half hidden behind flower arrangements taller than I was. From there I could watch the show. My brother Bram leaned toward a cousin and said, "Was she even invited?" The cousin shrugged. "I think she just showed up." My jaw tightened. I didn't answer. You can't argue with a performance this well-rehearsed. Someone laughed too loudly. Another person cried on cue. The air smelled like perfume and stale grief. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the buffet, tasted the bitterness, and swallowed it whole. I wondered if anyone noticed the irony, celebrating the life of a man who believed in truth while standing in a room full of liars. The slideshow restarted. The life and legacy of Edric Greaves. Pictures flickered again. Father shaking hands with donors. Mother smiling beside city officials. Bram cutting a ribbon at a charity gala. Each image brighter than the last, polished until it gleamed. Legacy. That was the word they used. As if I hadn't bled for it in silence. A woman I didn't know touched my arm. "You look so much like your mother," she said kindly. I smiled the way polite people do. "That's what they tell me." She drifted away before I could stop her, leaving behind the faint scent of lilac and something like pity. Silas appeared beside me. "It's been a long time," he said softly. His voice had the weight of an apology. "Yes," I answered, "and apparently not long enough." He hesitated, eyes scanning the crowd. Be careful tonight, he said under his breath. Then he turned and walked toward Valora, who was laughing now, radiant in widowhood. I stood there until the room began to empty. The air conditioner hummed. The projector clicked. My coffee had gone cold. I felt like the last guest at a party no one remembered inviting. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected on the wet pavement like veins of silver. I watched my mother step into a black car, Bram holding the door for her. Neither looked back. I lingered under the awning, reading the note again. 10 o'clock. Come alone. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The kind that came with a consequence if ignored. The last thing my grandfather said to me before the hospital took him was, "Trust the quiet ones, not the polished ones." Silas was quiet. Mother was polished. I breathed in the damp night air and walked toward my car. My reflection caught in the window glass, a ghost blurred by streetlight. For a moment, I imagined stepping inside and driving anywhere else. New York, Denver, anywhere but home. But the note in my pocket felt heavier than metal, heavier than guilt. And there was that part of me, small and stubborn, that needed to know why. When I glanced back at the building, the slideshow was still running behind the curtain. The photo of my grandfather faded to black, replaced by another smiling face. My face would never appear there again. I started the engine. The wipers moved once, clearing the windshield. The city blurred behind me as I drove, headlights slicing through the fog that clung to the river road. I thought about the word they'd used all afternoon, legacy, and how easily it had been taken from me. I remembered being 12, running barefoot through those estate halls, tracing the grooves in the wood my grandfather carved. I remembered my mother telling me not to leave fingerprints on the banister because appearances matter. Even then, I'd known she wasn't talking about the house. Now, years later, I was expected to return like nothing had happened, as if I still belonged to them. The funeral home lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. The road curved toward the old Greaves property, where secrets didn't die, they aged. I pressed my fingers to the folded paper again. The ink had smudged slightly from the rain, but the command was still clear. 10 o'clock. Alone. I whispered to no one. I'll be there. 10 o'clock. The gates of the Greaves estate creaked open like a mouth about to confess. I didn't press the brake. I rolled through like the car knew its way, gravel crunching under the tires, the headlights brushing across the moss that clung to the old oaks like time itself had grown tired. I hadn't seen this place since the last fight with my mother, 3 years, maybe 4. But the house hadn't changed. It still wore its power like a smile too wide to be kind. The porch lights were on, amber glow, polite, the same light they used in mortuaries and overpriced spas, just soft enough to numb you. Silas stood at the top of the steps, one hand resting against the pillar, the other in his coat pocket like he was holding something sharp. He didn't smile. Not that he ever did. "Thank you for coming alone," he said, his voice barely louder than the crickets behind him. "That was the request," I answered, "not the invitation." He stepped aside, but didn't motion me in. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket and held it toward me. A key. Brass. Worn smooth at the edges. "This isn't the room you were assigned," he said quietly. "I changed it. Trust me, Inara. Don't go to your old room tonight." He didn't explain. I didn't ask. I just took the key. The metal felt colder than the night air. It stung, like holding a memory too long. I stepped inside. The scent hit me first. Lemon oil, lavender, and something older. Something you only smelled in rooms that had seen too much and said too little. The kind of smell that clings to photo albums and regrets. The hallway stretched ahead, dark wood and darker secrets. I passed the old grandfather clock, still ticking like it never noticed who came and went. The east wing turned left. The guest wing, right? My hand brushed the railing as I passed the staircase. The wood was freshly polished, but I could still feel the small scar I'd carved under the banister when I was 15. A jagged line. A secret signature. The door to my old room was ajar. Just enough to make you look twice. Inside, stillness. Shadows. A sliver of moonlight caught on the edge of a framed photograph I couldn't see. The air was too still, like the room had been sealed in amber, not cleaned. 5 years, and I still knew that scent. They hadn't redecorated. They'd preserved it. I stopped. The weight of the key in my hand reminded me I had a choice. Just not the one they thought I'd make. I kept walking. My new room was on the West End, past the parlor no one used unless reporters were coming. It was smaller than my old room, colder and unfamiliar. The bedding was fresh, the lamp warm, but nothing here held me. Not yet. I set my overnight bag on the dresser, kicked off my shoes. My hands found the zipper on my jacket, but I didn't pull it down. I stood in the middle of the room, the echo of my grandfather's voice in my ears. Trust the quiet ones, not the polished ones. Silas was quiet. I moved to the closet and opened the door. Empty hangers, fresh paint. No ghosts. I heard it 5 minutes later. Not a bump. Not a thud. A scream. Full-throated. Female. Ripped from the gut like something had been taken. From the east wing. From the room I didn't go into. Silence followed, thick as molasses. Not even footsteps. Just that horrible hush that comes when a house tries to swallow what it knows. I didn't move. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. Because somewhere deep down I knew. That scream wasn't mine by exactly 5 minutes. The air in my lungs held still. I closed the closet door gently. Too gently. Like any louder and the walls might answer back. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Waited for someone to knock. For anyone to say something. To explain, deny, react. Nothing. Time passed the way it does when you're counting your own breath. Still, no one knocked. The silence pressed against the walls like it was trying to get in. By morning, they would pretend nothing happened. But the wallpaper in the east wing still echoed. The scream hadn't just happened. It had lodged itself in the bones of the house. It clung to the corners, threaded through the wiring, stained the air like smoke that no one wanted to admit had once been fire. I moved slowly down the stairs, each step groaning beneath me as if the house itself questioned my right to descend. I expected chaos, questions, concern, at least a murmur of acknowledgement. Maybe someone pacing, hands through their hair, trying to understand what had pierced the night so violently. But no. The morning unfurled like every other forced sunrise in this house. Deliberate, pretty hollow. The kitchen smelled of fresh cinnamon rolls, warm butter, and hand-ground coffee, the kind Valora insisted tasted better when brewed in the French press made of Italian glass. Everything was curated. Everything was performance. She sat at the head of the breakfast table in her ivory robe, skin powdered, lips tinted the faintest coral. Her posture was flawless, one leg crossed gently over the other like she was posing for a vintage perfume ad. Bram stood near the window, backlit by sunlight and scrolling through his phone like the night hadn't splintered open just hours ago. No one looked up. Roses are blooming early this year, Valora said, her eyes still on the newspaper. Her voice held a rehearsed elegance. We should have the gardener rotate them. Not a question. Not a glance. Just noise masquerading as calm. I stared at her. At Bram. At the tableau of a family too disciplined to acknowledge fracture. I felt invisible and exposed all at once. Bram finally noticed me, eyes flicking up from his screen. You're up. I didn't answer. There was no right response to that kind of deflection. My mouth was dry. I could still feel the echo of that scream. I wasn't sure if it had come from outside me or within. I sat briefly, out of habit more than hunger, but the chair felt foreign, like I was trespassing in a museum exhibit. Valora poured her tea with meticulous grace. Bram buttered a croissant. I watched them perform their roles. No one mentioned the scream. No one asked if I was okay. I wasn't sure which silence hurt more, the one I grew up with, or the one I had just walked into. I left the room. The hallway yawned open in front of me, lined with portraits, faces too perfect to be trusted, smiles stretched just tight enough to crack. I passed them quickly, refusing to meet their painted eyes. The library door creaked when I pushed it. The sound pulled at something soft and raw in me. It was familiar, real, the kind of imperfection this house tried so hard to erase. Inside, the air was still. Sunlight bled through the tall windows in soft lines. Dust hung like it had nowhere else to go. Books towered around me, stories that hadn't moved in decades. The fireplace lay cold. A faint scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air, a ghost of my grandfather. And then movement. Mavis. She stood with her back to me, fingers gently brushing dust from the spines of journals stacked high along the eastern wall. Her presence didn't surprise me. Somehow, she always showed up when the silence grew too loud. "You went where you weren't supposed to," she said, quiet and unwavering. I paused, the truth resting on the tip of my tongue. "And yet," I whispered, "I'm still here." She turned. Time had carved new lines into her face, but her gaze hadn't aged. It still saw too much, still knew how to navigate the maze of his family better than anyone else. "Not everyone is child," she said. Her voice wavered, not with age, but with memory. I felt it like a chill through my spine. I moved closer, drawn to the certainty in her stillness. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her silence was permission. I walked past her, deeper into the room. Toward the far corner. The drawer was still there. At 13, it had been my hiding place, where I stashed candy and secrets and poems I never meant to show. My sanctuary from curated chaos. I opened it without knowing why. Muscle memory, maybe. Or intuition. Or something older. Paper. Yellowed. Brittle. My fingers trembled as they pulled it free. No envelope. No date. Just one sentence in slanted handwriting that felt feminine, rushed, afraid. I thought they brought me home to heal. But I haven't seen sunlight in days. The words hit like a slap. They were mine. But not mine. A bruise under the skin of history. I folded into the armchair by the window, the one I used to curl up in when the world felt too sharp. My grandfather had once said, "Truth leaves residue, even after it's buried." At the time, I thought he was talking about politics. Now I wasn't so sure. The East Wing. At 13, they said I'd fallen. They told the doctors I was disoriented, emotional, sensitive. But I remembered bruises, strange, purple fingerprints in places I couldn't explain. I remembered Valora brushing my hair and saying, "We don't make accusations in this family. We maintain dignity." 3 days. No light. No voices. No one opened the door. Now the same words. From someone else. I wasn't the first. Maybe I wasn't even the second. I held the paper tighter. Folded it carefully, like it might disintegrate from neglect. Pressed it into my palm. Let it burn. The house exhaled around me, bored settling, or something older waking. "I'm not the first," I whispered. And somewhere, just barely, I felt something shift. The house wanted silence, but I still had a voice, and it was starting to wake up. Dinner was set like an exhibition. Too much shine, too much control. Every fork, every napkin, every plate sat where she wanted it, and my chair was placed just a few inches off center. A small correction, almost invisible but deliberate. That was how Valora operated. She erased you with symmetry. The lights above the table were too bright, bouncing off the crystal in little blinding flashes. Bram was already seated, tapping his knife against the table like the rhythm soothed him. My father sat opposite, staring into his glass of wine as if it might give him permission to speak. Valora smiled when I entered, all hostess charm and effortless grace. "You look tired," she said. "Travel and grief, awful combination." She reached for her clutch and set a small white bottle beside my plate. Her voice softened, the same softness that once preceded every punishment. "Just something to help you sleep. Grief is exhausting, darling." The label caught the light. Same cursive handwriting as the pills she'd given me when I was 17. Back then, it was for anxiety. Back then, I thought mothers didn't lie. I traced a finger over the letters. "You think I need it?" Valora's smile didn't waver. "You always did. You run on nerves, Inara. Always have. You overthink, you overfeel some things don't change." Bram laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it." I looked at him, his smirk too smug for someone who'd never built anything of his own. "I sleep fine," I said. Valora's gaze hardened just a fraction. "Try it anyway." I lifted the bottle. The pills rattled like tiny lies. I didn't open it. Not yet. Dinner went on, heavy with the sound of silverware and avoidance. My father finally spoke, asking Bram about a new client, his tone eager to fill the space where honesty should have been. I let them talk. Their voices blurred into a low hum, safe, familiar deceit. Afterward, I excused myself, said I needed air. The hallway was darker than I remembered, the scent of lemon oil thick enough to taste. Portraits lined the walls, each one staring down like a jury. My heels clicked softly on the floor, each step timed with the steady beat of my pulse. When I reached the landing, I saw it, the door to my old room, half open again. A shadow waited inside, perfectly still. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I'd spent too many years obeying instincts that weren't mine. I slipped off my shoes. Barefoot, silent, I pushed the door open. The air was colder here, like the room had been sealed from the rest of the house. The curtains were drawn, the bed neatly made, the walls of familiar pale blue that once made me feel safe. Now it felt staged, too careful, like a set built to recreate memory. A soft draft brushed my arm. I followed it to the dresser. Behind it, the faint hum of something mechanical. The back panel had new bolts, shiny against the old wood. I found a screwdriver in the drawer, neatly placed, like someone expected me to need it. When I loosened the screws, the vent cover came free, revealing a nest of wires and a small camera, its red light dead but not cold. Inside, folded neatly, was a printed sheet. Lines of numbers, temperature logs, date and timestamps that matched when I was last here. They hadn't wanted me to rest. They wanted to measure me, record me, study my breakdown in high definition. I felt a tremor crawl through my chest. Not fear, rage. A quiet, focused kind of rage that made the world feel clearer. They didn't want me to sleep, I whispered. They wanted to break me quietly. I pulled the memory card from the device and pocketed it. The floor near the bed caught my eye, faint scratches in the wood, running toward the door. Fingernail marks, maybe. Too small to be mine now, but maybe not too small to have been mine then. I turned off the light. The room fell into shadow, but I could still see the outline of the bed. Too neat, too ready. I shut the door softly, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready to be seen yet. Back in my room, I sat on the bed, the memory card heavy in my palm. The silence of the house pressed against the walls again, steady, watchful. I slipped the card beneath my pillow, the same way I used to hide notes from my grandfather when I was a child, as if secrets slept better near your head. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed once. I lay back, eyes open to the ceiling, every muscle coiled with the truth I hadn't meant to find. "Not tonight," I whispered. "You don't get to win tonight." And for the first time since I came home, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. I wasn't paranoid. I was being watched. And now I was watching back. The morning crept in pale and heavy, a film of gray light sliding through the curtains. My body ached with the kind of tension that doesn't sleep. The silence of the house didn't comfort me, it sharpened me. Everything felt paused, like a play mid-scene, waiting for someone to remember their line. I rose before the rest of them, the house still half dreaming, and followed the faint hum of the air ducts down the hallway. The memory card rested in my pocket like a heartbeat, one-eyed stolen from Bram's briefcase the night before. He shouldn't have left it unlocked. But then, he never thought he had anything to hide from me. That was his first mistake. I found myself in my grandfather's study, the only room that still smelled like pipe smoke and old ink. It felt untouched by the years. The desk sat exactly as it had when I was a child, mahogany polished to a mirror, paper stacked in precise disorder. The kind of disorder only intentional hands could make. He had always tapped the floor 3 times before sitting. I remembered because I'd copied him as a girl, thinking it was a secret code. I knelt by the chair and tapped once. The sound was hollow. Twice, again hollow. The 3rd time, the tone changed. I pressed my palm against the floorboard. It shifted slightly, giving under the weight of my hand. Dust rose in a soft sigh as I pried it loose. Beneath, an envelope lay hidden, dry despite the years. My name curved across it in his handwriting. Edric Greaves, always looping the R like a flourish of patience. Like forgiveness, he never gave freely. My breath hitched as I slid the letter free. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded to brown. It felt alive in my hands, too fragile to belong in this house. "If you are reading this," it began, "then I could not protect you in time." Each word struck like a match inside me. I read slowly as if speed might undo it. He wrote of the estate, the trust, the legacy. But mostly he wrote of me. How he'd seen the way Valora looked through me instead of at me. How she tried to bury my name beneath layers of paperwork, lies, and smiling toasts. "She is not evil," he wrote. "But she is afraid of losing control, afraid of what she can't rewrite. They will try to convince you that you are mistaken. Do not believe them. The truth will rot in this house if you let it. He hadn't left me money. He'd left me memory. Untouched." I folded the letter and held it against my chest until the trembling slowed. For the first time, I felt something close to faith, not in them, but in me. Later that evening, the family gathered in the parlor for drinks. Bram was telling a story too loud for the room, and Valora laughed as if nothing inside her had teeth. The room smelled of gin, leather, and history too long rehearsed. I excused myself, saying I needed air, but none of them asked where I was going. The east wing was dim, its chandeliers long since coated in dust. Portraits lined the corridor, oil paintings of Greaves, men shaking hands, women frozen in lace, generations staring down from the walls like witnesses who'd taken a vow of silence. I walked slowly, studying their faces. My mother in her 20s, radiant and cold. My father beside her, dutiful smile in place. Bram at 16, framed as the future of the family. A gallery curated by legacy, curated by power. And then, at the far end of the hall, 2 empty spaces. Hooks on the wall. Brass plates beneath them read, "Reserved." One for Edric Greaves, the other for me. The realization hit clean and hard. They didn't forget to hang my portrait. They planned not to. A storm of humiliation and clarity rippled through me. It wasn't about omission. It was design, an inheritance of absence, passed down like silverware. This house didn't erase me by accident. It made room for the erasure. The hallway was too quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the next room, each second slicing through the still air. I imagined my mother giving the order. "Not that one, not yet," her voice smooth as honey over arsenic. I stepped closer to the wall. Dust traced my outline in the brass where the frame had never hung. The longer I stared, the more it felt like the house itself was breathing against my skin, watching me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I whispered, "You erased me from the walls too." There was a tremor in my throat that wasn't fear. It was fury held steady. On a side table nearby, a candle rested in a tarnished holder. I struck a match, the flame flickering to life with a faint hiss. I set it before the empty wall and watched its reflection waver in the brass. The fire was small, but it danced like defiance. "Let them hang their legacy in silence," I murmured. "I'll write mine in fire." I didn't move until the wax began to pool. Back in the study, I powered on my laptop and slid the memory card into the reader. Bram's files loaded slowly. Password protected, but not encrypted. Arrogance had made him sloppy. Folder after folder, labeled innocuously. Charity events, financial statements, trust disbursements. But then one labeled simply, Violet. I opened it. Documents, images, call logs, recordings, some of my therapy sessions. How had he gotten those? And notes. His notes. Clinical and cold. Subject shows signs of emotional volatility under duress. Recommend continued distancing strategies. If provoked, she becomes unpredictable. Maintain narrative, she misremembers. Leverage family loyalty to isolate. Asset access deny. He had a playbook, a goddamn manual on how to unmake me. I felt sick. My ribs ached with the pressure of held breath. There, beneath the files, was a final note. VL wants her out before November. The line rang in my skull like a bell struck too hard. Before November. Before my birthday. Before the reading of the will. I copied every file. Then I made a backup. Then another. And when I was done, I deleted nothing. Let them think the secret's still safe. Outside, rain began to needle against the windows. I listened to it in silence. They didn't want me erased. They wanted me to erase myself. But I was still here. And I was done being quiet. By morning, their version of the story would begin to bleed. The candle had burned itself out overnight, leaving a puddle of wax hardened on the side table. I could smell smoke faintly in the air, thin, acrid, but almost clean. It smelled like truth that had escaped containment. When I came downstairs, I found Valora already in the dining room, her posture elegant and tight as piano wire. A screen had been set up at the head of the long mahogany table, the silver breakfast trays pushed to the side. "Sit, Inara," she said smoothly. "We're about to start." Her tone wasn't invitation. It was command disguised as warmth. Bram sat beside her, all confidence and champagne breath. My father looked smaller than usual, head bowed, eyes glassy. Silas was there too, adjusting the projector, his expression carefully neutral. I took the seat farthest from Valora because distance was the only defense I still had left. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. My grandfather's face appeared, older than I remembered, voice steady as he spoke about the values of truth, family, legacy. My chest tightened. For a moment, it almost felt like he was still in the room, still capable of saving me. And then it came. The pause. The cut. He said, "To my beloved family." A sudden jump in the frame. His tone shifted mid-sentence. "I leave behind what each of you has earned." My name never came. Not once. The rest played seamlessly. Too seamlessly. When the video ended, the room filled with polite applause. Bram clapped hardest, like he'd just been crowned. Valora's eyes glittered, soft in victory. The tape was clean, I thought. Too clean. Like they edited me from the dead. Silas wouldn't meet my gaze. That told me everything. I pushed back my chair slowly, the scrape of wood against tile cutting through the applause. "You edited him," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it silenced them just the same. "That video's not whole." Valora tilted her head, feigning confusion. "I beg your pardon." "You cut my name out." Her smile didn't waver. "Inara, your grandfather's memory isn't something you should question. It's distasteful." Bram chuckled. "Here we go again." I turned to Silas. Did you do it? His jaw twitched. I was only asked to prepare what I was given. By who? I asked, but I already knew. Valora's voice turned soft again, the kind of soft that bruises. You should be careful what you accuse people of. You've always been prone to misunderstandings. Prone, Bram echoed, smirking. That's one word for it. Something inside me hardened, and I smiled. You've been practicing this speech for years, haven't you? Before she could answer, something slipped from Lilith's purse beside me. Envelopes, pale cream with embossed edges. One fell open. I saw the money before she could hide it. I picked it up slowly, letting the bills show. How much does it take to buy silence these days, Lilith? Her face blanched. It's not. Who paid you? I asked. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She said it was just to fix a mistake. The room mix-up. I froze. The East Wing. She nodded. She said you wouldn't notice. Valora's chair scraped back. That's enough, Lilith. Lilith looked between us like a frightened bird. I didn't know what was going to happen. I swear. Valora's voice cut through the air like glass shattering. Stop speaking. Istehtaha. You put someone else in that room. You made me the bait. Her lips thinned. Don't be dramatic. The word burned. Dramatic. They'd used it my entire life to turn my truth into theater. I left the room before she could twist the knife again. My legs carried me upstairs, but my mind was already somewhere else, searching for the next move, the next crack in her perfect walls. That night, I passed Silas in the hallway. He didn't speak, just nodded once, guilt flickering like lightning behind his eyes. I wanted to ask him why he stayed loyal to a woman who destroyed everything she touched, but I already knew the answer. Money, reputation, fear. They all bowed to the same god. Later, from my doorway, I heard my mother's voice. Muffled but clear enough. She was in the study with Silas. This is her record, she said, from when she was 17. Hallucinations, disassociation. Everything we need if she tries anything stupid. Silas whispered something I couldn't catch. Valora replied, colder now. If she wants a war, she can have one. But she won't win. She never does. I leaned against the wall, the anger sharp and cold, not the hot kind that burns. Cold anger doesn't fade. It calcifies. I remember the pills on the table, the bottle she'd handed me like a gift. I remembered every time she'd said, "You're too emotional," every diagnosis disguised as concern. I wasn't unstable. I was inconvenient. I went back to my room. The laptop glowed faintly on the desk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If she wanted to fight this way, I would match her step for step. I opened a browser, typed slowly, carefully. Pro bono mental health defense attorney, Charleston. The cursor blinked. A promise. If they wanted to put me on trial, they'd find I'd already started mine. The days slipped by under a pretense of civility. Valora spent the morning on the phone with donors, her voice honeyed and efficient, a tone she reserved for strangers and enemies. She laughed at the right moments, cooed when necessary, and wielded charm like a scalpel, delicate but cutting. Bram left for a meeting that didn't exist. I saw his car parked at the country club on my walk that afternoon. My father lingered in the study, pretending to read a biography he wouldn't remember. He hadn't read a full book since I was 16. He didn't ask what I was doing home, nor what I planned next. Cowardice had a face, and it looked like his. I spent the afternoon pretending to be calm. I moved through the house quietly, like I belonged in every room, even the ones they thought were theirs. I watched, waited, calculated the right place to listen. The parlor was perfect, open enough to seem innocent, close enough to the study where they schemed behind fake smiles and polished glasses. On the mantel sat a heavy antique vase. Porcelain, hand-painted, the kind Valora bragged about to journalists as a family heirloom. A trophy of appearances. I slid the recorder beneath it, pressed the small red button, and let it blink quietly in the shadows. Then I waited. Dinner was a theater of manners, the kind she rehearsed in her head. She was radiant again, dressed in navy silk, and pearls that looked like tiny moons strung across her neck. Her lipstick was a muted red, the same shade she wore at funerals and fundraisers. Controlled, commanding. "It's strange," she said, slicing into her salmon with precision, "how grief turns people against each other. I think it's the air in this house. It magnifies insecurity." Bram smirked. "Maybe it's contagious." Their conversation was so measured, so impossibly curated, it could have been rehearsed by a PR team. I played my part, as I always had, the silent daughter, the one who folded rather than fought, the one who knew how to set a table and never interrupt. But inside, I wasn't listening anymore. I was documenting. Every word, every pause, every knowing glance, it was all evidence. A record of rot wrapped in crystal chandeliers and expensive cutlery. When dessert was served, lavender creme brulee, I excused myself. My spoon clinked gently against the dish, and I stood with a grace they taught me. "My head hurts," I murmured. Valora didn't look up. "Take something for it," she said, her eyes fixed on Bram's face like a spotlight. I walked up the stairs slowly, counting every step like I was walking a plank. Hours later, when the house settled into its usual hush, I returned to the parlor. The room smelled faintly of wine and roses. I retrieved the recorder, heart pounding like it knew something I didn't. I sat cross-legged on the rug, headphones snug against my ears, the moon slicing silver through the drapes. My hands trembled as I pressed play. At first, only static. Then, the distant sound of chairs scraping, the rustle of papers, a glass being set down. And then, my father's voice, flat, exhausted, familiar. "She breaks protocol again. We have the documents ready." My stomach dropped. Valora's voice followed, as calm and cutting as her laughter. "Then we put her where no one will hear her." I paused the recording. My fingers hovered in the air, breath caught in my throat. Not punishment, not shame, erasure. They weren't trying to contain me. They were planning to silence me permanently. Legally. I rewound the tape, played it again. His tone wasn't fear. It was compliance. There was no hesitation in his voice. No plea. No doubt. He wasn't trapped under Valora's rule. He was comfortable there. A man who found peace in submission, as long as someone else cleaned the mess. The recording ended. The silence in my ears felt louder than their words. Something clicked in me. A quiet click, like a lock sliding into place. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was realization. Every word Valora spoke came coated in the same perfume, control disguised as care. She didn't need to scream. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her silence was violence enough. At 2 a.m, a sound stirred me. A knock. No, not a knock. Just a shift of air. A presence. I felt it before I heard it. "Inara," she said. Soft. Too soft. The voice of bedtime stories and discipline. "Don't let this be like last time. Don't make us repeat history." My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Her voice changed, just slightly. The velvet peeled back, revealing something harder underneath. "You're tired. You're not thinking clearly. Come downstairs. We can talk." No movement. I imagined her standing there, perfectly still, like a statue outside my door. Counting seconds. Measuring control. 10. 15. Then came a sigh. Disappointed. Performative. Followed by the whisper of her slippers retreating down the hallway like retreating waves. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was still warm. If I opened that door, I'd disappear. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat upright in bed, knees hugged to my chest, the recorder and the memory card from the hidden camera on the nightstand beside me. Two tiny witnesses. Two fragile pieces of truth. Proof. Outside, the moon crawled across the window pane like a silent spectator. Silver light spilled across the nightstand, bathing the recorder in ghostly glow. The hum of the air vents filled the room. The house was breathing, stretching its bones. I could feel it. This place had teeth. But so did I. My voice had always been the quietest one in the house. The one ignored, redirected, overwritten. But the truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to survive. And it had. On tape. On film. In whispers between walls. I ran my fingers over the memory card. Just a sliver of plastic. But it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Downstairs, they were planning the final act. Upstairs, I was writing my own. I opened my laptop, inserted the memory card, uploaded the audio. I didn't know yet where I'd send it. To the media, the lawyers, or the public. But I knew this much. The truth no longer belonged to them. The clock blinked 3:14 a.m. The air felt different now. Not safer, just clearer. Like a storm had passed, and all that was left was the damage and the decision of what to rebuild. I looked down at the recorder again. Let's see whose voice screams louder, I whispered. And I pressed save. I wasn't going to knock down their door. I was going to drag the house down with me. The morning sky was too pristine. It had that brittle, unnatural blue that hurt your eyes if you looked too long, like a lie that smiled too wide. Birds chirped as if nothing was wrong, as if the world wasn't about to split open at the seams. The Greaves estate looked the same as always, too large, too perfect, and far too silent. But today, they couldn't hide behind its gates. White tents fluttered in the backyard, fluttering like nervous hands. Polished cutlery gleamed on linen-draped tables. Bottles of champagne sweated in silver buckets, awaiting toasts no one would remember. The banners called it a memorial brunch. But it wasn't for Edric. Not really. It was for them. The trustees, the journalists, the city councilwoman Valora had been courting. This was their pageant, their costume party of grief, staged for cameras and political leverage. They never cared for truth, only optics. I arrived just as a string quartet began a soft, meaningless tune. I wore black, but not the kind they expected. No veil, no roofless, no softness to mourn a man they'd erased. My dress was structured, brutal. My heels sharp enough to stab through stone. I didn't come to mourn. I came to expose. Valora saw me walking toward the podium, and the glass mask she wore cracked, just a flicker in her eye. "No need for a speech, dear," she said smoothly, resting a manicured hand on my arm. "We're keeping things light." I looked at her, then past her to the crowd. Bram nodded politely with his mimosa. Gareth glanced at the buffet table like it might rescue him, and Silas stared at his shoes. "I won't take long," I replied, stepping behind the podium before they could stop me. I didn't carry notes. No speech. Just a small black box. It had lived beneath my bed since the night Edric died. I carried it in silence, fingers clenched so tightly I left crescents in my palm. Inside were 3 things: a flash drive, a folded letter, and a recorder. The room, if you could call a tent with chandeliers a room, stilled. I took out the flash drive first. Held it up. "My grandfather didn't want a brunch," I said, my voice even, but loud enough to pierce the shallow quiet. "He asked to be remembered truthfully. Today I honor that." I inserted the drive into the laptop meant for Valora's tribute video. The screen blinked, then replaced her slideshow with a still frame. Edric, in his study, gray-haired, clear-eyed, sitting straighter than I'd seen him in years. The video began to play. "To my granddaughter Inara," Edric said, "I leave the West Garden, the library, and controlling interest in the Greaves Foundation as outlined in the enclosed addendum. She has always seen the truth others pretend doesn't exist." A gasp. A hand covered a mouth. Bram looked like he swallowed his tongue. Before the murmurs could rise, I pressed play on the second file. This one was quieter. Muffled. Secret. Gareth. She breaks protocol again. We have the documents ready. Velora. Then we put her where no one will hear her. And then silence. Not just on the recording. In the room. The air thickened. Oxygen evaporating into tension. You could hear everything. The clink of a spoon hitting the floor, the buzz of someone's phone, the shifting of shame in expensive clothes. Silas stood. I need to clarify something, he said, his voice cracking. The video played previously was edited. Under directive. Not by Edric. Not of his will. Velora turned to him, panic flashing for the first time. You swore. I swore to the truth, he snapped. And I'm tired of lying for you. Gareth stood next, desperation leaking through his mask. She planned all of this. Velora orchestrated it. I just followed orders. Velora slapped him. Hard. Sharp. The sound echoed off the crystal tent ceiling. Flashes went off. Cameras caught it all. That's when the chaos really started. 2 detectives pushed through the guests. Badges raised but unnecessary. They moved with purpose. With knowledge. The IRS agents came next, briefcases in hand, walking like they'd been waiting for this moment. Names were called. Phones seized. One trustee fainted. Lilith sobbed as she was escorted away, her scholarship revoked for falsifying recommendations. Bram tried to leave, but found the gates locked. Velora sat in the front row, her expression frozen in something between disbelief and fury. She didn't speak when the agents handed her the letter. A federal ban from managing financial entities pending a formal investigation into fraud, coercion, and asset misappropriation. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Truth had done the talking for me. I walked away, slowly, deliberately, down the marble steps, past the guests whispering my name with new recognition. Not the girl they ignored, not the mistake, but the storm that finally came. As I passed through the wrought iron gates, I noticed something new. A plaque had been installed overnight, still gleaming with fresh polish. The Edric Greaves Foundation, for women silenced by bloodlines. Restored by Inara Greaves. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But inside, something quiet exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward something, not away. A year later, the echo of that morning still followed me, not like a ghost, but like armor. The foundation had taken shape faster than I expected. The old estate, once cold and suffocating, had been stripped of its darkness. The walls were painted a soft ivory now, sunlight spilling through windows that had been sealed for decades. The scent of the place had changed, too. No more lemon polish and false order, just wildflowers, coffee, and life. Children's voices drifted through the halls. Their laughter carried through the same corridors where my footsteps once trembled. I walked slowly, letting the sound wrap around me. It was strange how healing could echo the same way harm once did. Mavis was in the garden, her hair silver and shining in the afternoon light. She was directing a group of volunteers, planting rose bushes by the fence line. When she saw me, she wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "You finally let the weeds go," she said. "I had to," I answered. They were starting to look like the family crest. She laughed softly and went back to work. The sound was warm, unpretentious, like rain after a dry season. I walked to the east corridor, where the portrait wall once stood. I stopped at the base of it. The paintings were gone. In their place hung art made by women who had survived something like me. Bold strokes, soft faces, abstract shapes that looked like freedom learning to take form. The frames weren't empty anymore. They just held different kinds of stories. One painting caught my eye, a figure standing in a field of red, faceless but unbroken. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "Donated by L.V. Lilith Vane." I hadn't seen her since the investigation, but I knew she'd found her own way out. I reached out, brushing my fingertips along the edge of the frame. For a moment, I thought I heard my grandfather's voice again, low and proud. You finally rebuilt it, Inara. But this time you built it your way. I stayed there longer than I meant to, letting the silence stretch. Not empty, not heavy, just full. Later that afternoon, a young woman came through the main doors. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her hands shook as she filled out the volunteer form. When she saw me, she hesitated. "Are you Miss Greaves?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She looked down, embarrassed. "I almost didn't come. But then I saw your name on the website. I thought, if she can, maybe I can too." I smiled, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. "You already did. You showed up." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded, clutching her clipboard like a shield. I remember that feeling, the weight of showing up after being silenced for too long. When she walked away, I sat for a moment on the bench near the window. Outside, the roses were blooming again, wild and untrimmed. My mother would have hated them. "They didn't need to remember me anymore," I whispered. "But I will remember myself." That night, after everyone left, I sat in the study, my study now. The desk was still the same, though the shadows were softer. I opened the drawer and pulled out the letter. The paper was brittle, its folds worn thin, but it still carried a scent. "Speak, even when they erase you," my grandfather had written. Especially then. I traced the words with my thumb, the ink faint but unbroken. His handwriting had always been deliberate, confident, almost defiant. I realized now that he'd written it not as advice, but as prophecy. The world outside had gone quiet. I could hear the faint hum of traffic from the main road and the gentle rustle of leaves against the window pane. The house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It exhaled. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it all settle. Not victory, not loss, just something that felt like balance. The pain hadn't vanished. It had simply learned where to live. I thought of my mother then, of the empire she'd built on control, now reduced to silence. Part of me wondered if she ever looked at her reflection and saw what she'd done. Another part didn't care. Some things didn't need to be avenged. They just needed to be left behind. I stood, folded the letter carefully, and placed it back in the drawer. "I didn't reclaim a legacy," I said softly to the empty room. "I reclaimed my voice, and this time I'll keep it." Maybe it was never about reclaiming a legacy. Maybe it was about proving that silence isn't the absence of strength, but the birthplace of it. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after being erased by the very people who raised you? If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt like your truth, don't just scroll past. Share it. Let someone else feel seen too. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. There are more voices ready to rise. Maybe the next one will be yours.